The stage was set for what should have been a fairly ordinary afternoon on Loose Women. The ITV panel show is known for its lively debates, laughter, and occasional flare-ups, but few expected that a routine discussion would spiral into the kind of chaos that left audiences stunned, producers scrambling, and Dame Judi Dench, walking off set in disgrace. It was the kind of TV moment that people replay, dissect, and argue over for weeks. The clash wasn't just about opinions. It was about pride, generational tension, and the dangerous unpredictability of live television. What began as a simple exchange turned into a showdown that revealed a darker, more antagonistic side of a woman long thought to be untouchable. It started innocently enough. The day's topic was something familiar, the sort of conversation the Loose Women table thrives on: fame, legacy, and how public figures adapt, or fail to adapt, to modern culture. Judi Dench, invited as the day's celebrity guest, carried with her the weight of decades of theatrical brilliance. From Shakespeare to Hollywood blockbusters, her voice and presence had long commanded awe. Viewers tuned in expecting respect, reverence, and a sprinkle of charm. But live TV has no script. Denise Welch, a seasoned panelist with a reputation for speaking her mind, wasn't about to let Judi glide unchallenged. As Judi shared her views on the evolving landscape of television, Denise cut across her mid-sentence. The interruption was sharp, deliberate, and dismissive. Gasps rippled through the audience. Even the other panelists stiffened in their seats, and that's when it happened. The spark. Judi's eyes narrowed. Her body stiffened. The interruption wasn't taken as healthy debate. It was taken as an insult, a challenge to her authority. With an edge in her voice, she snapped back. Her retort, clipped and cold, sent shockwaves across the studio. This wasn't the polished, graceful Judi Dench audiences admired. This was Judi stripped bare, irritated, exposed, and ready to lash out. From there, the tension only escalated. The studio atmosphere shifted instantly. Viewers at home later described it as uncomfortable, hostile, and like watching a car crash in slow motion. What had started as a lively panel suddenly became a duel, and Judi Dench, a woman used to commanding respect, found herself face to face with someone who had no intention of bowing down. It wasn't just an interruption. It was the first strike in what would become one of the most humiliating clashes daytime television had seen in years. Once the spark was lit, there was no turning back. Judi Dench and Denise Welch represented two very different worlds, and now those worlds were colliding in front of a live audience. On one side was Judi, the grande dame of theater, polished by decades of accolades, honors, and standing ovations. She spoke with the authority of someone who had shared the stage with legends, who had built a career on gravitas and control. For Judi, her word wasn't just an opinion. It was supposed to be gospel. On the other side was Denise Welch, outspoken, brash, unapologetic, and unafraid. A fixture on Loose Women for years, she had carved her reputation not through deference, but through confrontation. Denise wasn't impressed by Judi's knighthood, her awards, or her reputation. Denise played to the audience, to the immediacy of the moment. She spoke the way modern viewers expect: blunt, unfiltered, and provocative. As the exchange heated up, it became clear that this wasn't just a personal spat. It was a battle of eras. Judi embodied the old guard: tradition, hierarchy, reverence. Denise embodied the new: rebellion, disruption, fearless candor. And Denise wasn't afraid to say it. She accused Judi to her face of being out of touch. She suggested that Judi's era was fading, that her perspective no longer carried the weight it once did. The words cut like knives, delivered not with respect but with open disdain. The audience reacted instantly. Some gasped at the audacity of Welch challenging a national treasure so openly. Others clapped, cheering on her refusal to bow down. Social media lit up in real time. Twitter feeds exploded with comments. "Denise is right. Judi's living in the past." Others fired back. "How dare Denise Welch talk down to Dame Judi Dench?" The set itself felt split in two. The other panelists shifted uncomfortably, torn between defending Judi's legendary status and acknowledging that Denise had tapped into a truth that was hard to deny. For Judi, though, the humiliation was visible. She wasn't used to this kind of defiance. Her career had been built on respect, her presence enough to silence critics. But here on a daytime talk show, none of that mattered. Denise Welch wasn't bowing, and the audience wasn't unanimously on Judi's side. This was no longer a polite debate. It was generational warfare, playing out in real time, exposing the fault lines of celebrity culture itself. By now, the atmosphere in the studio was electric. What had begun as banter had spiraled into a raw, unscripted confrontation. Viewers at home could feel it. The tweets, the posts, the clips that would later flood TikTok all carried the same sentiment. This was no ordinary loose women moment. This was a train wreck you couldn't look away from. Judi Dench, the legend, the national icon, the face of authority, was unraveling on live TV. Her responses grew sharper, her tone colder, her body language stiffer with every passing moment. She wasn't engaging in debate anymore. She was defending her throne. But on Loose Women, there is no throne. There is only the table, and around that table, everyone is fair game. Denise Welch seized the moment. She stood firm, unflinching, her voice growing louder as she doubled down on her points. She accused Judi of speaking down to others, of failing to understand modern audiences, of clinging to a status that didn't excuse arrogance. It was brutal, direct, and devastating. The audience in the studio gasped. Some clapped for Denise's bravery. Others groaned audibly, horrified at the sight of a revered actress being brought down so openly. The tension was unbearable. Viewers at home were just as divided. Comments flooded social media. Denise Welch just destroyed Judi Dench on live TV, and this is the most disrespectful thing I've ever seen. The nation was watching a generational icon being publicly challenged, and the shockwaves spread far beyond the studio walls. For Judi, this was more than uncomfortable. It was catastrophic. For decades, she had enjoyed a public image untouched by scandal, revered for her grace and gravitas. But here, on a daytime talk show, that image cracked. The mask slipped, and what emerged wasn't regal or untouchable. It was human, defensive, and, to some, arrogant. The producers scrambled during the break. The other panelists exchanged nervous glances, and the audience sat in stunned silence, realizing they were witnessing a moment that would dominate headlines, fuel debates, and forever alter the way people saw Dame Judi Dench. This wasn't just television. This was history, and it was humiliating. The break in civility had already cracked wide open, but Denise Welch wasn't about to back down. She leaned forward, her tone sharper, her gestures more animated. For years, viewers had known Welch as outspoken, unfiltered, often the spark behind the show's most controversial moments. But this wasn't her usual fiery commentary. This was a full-on assault, one aimed directly at Judi Dench's carefully polished armor. "You can't sit here and act like you're above everyone," Denise reportedly shot across the table, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the audience. The words landed like a slap. The crowd gasped, some clapped, and others sat frozen in disbelief. Denise wasn't just disagreeing. She was dismantling the idea that Judi's stature placed her beyond reproach, and Judi's face told the story. The legendary poise was slipping. The composure of a woman who had stared down Shakespearean tragedies and Hollywood critics alike was crumbling under the blunt, unrelenting force of Welch's attack. She wasn't used to being challenged on live television. She wasn't used to having her authority undermined by someone who refused to yield. What made the moment even more brutal was Denise's persistence. Every time Judi attempted to respond, to reassert control, Welch cut in again, louder, firmer, unapologetic. This wasn't a debate anymore, it was domination. For a national treasure like Judi, the humiliation was profound. Her legacy meant little in this moment. Her decades of awards, her royal accolades, her status as Britain's Grand Dame, none of it shielded her from Denise Welch's refusal to bow down. Denise wasn't intimidated, not even slightly. In fact, the more Judi bristled, the more emboldened Denise became, and the audience could feel it. A palpable shift in the power dynamic played out live. Denise Welch, the panelist often dismissed as too loud, too brash, too controversial, had the upper hand against one of the most decorated actresses of her generation. The studio audience, usually a background presence, suddenly became part of the spectacle. Their reactions weren't uniform. They were fractured, divided, as if the nation itself was split down the middle. On one side were those horrified by Welch's audacity. Gasps of shock rang out when she interrupted Judi for the third, fourth, fifth time. To them, this was unforgivable, a blatant show of disrespect to a woman who had given so much to theater, film, and national culture. These audience members groaned, shook their heads, muttered under their breath. For them, Denise Welch had crossed a sacred line. On the other side, though, were those who applauded. They clapped loudly, some even cheered, emboldening Welch as she refused to soften her tone. To this group, Denise wasn't being disrespectful. She was being brave. She was saying what many felt but never dared to voice, that Judi Dench, for all her accomplishments, had grown out of touch, arrogant, unwilling to accept that times had changed. This split didn't stay in the studio. Within minutes, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok lit up with clips and commentary. The hashtags trended immediately. One side accused Denise of humiliating a beloved legend. The other praised her for standing her ground against someone who had long been treated as untouchable. The clash was no longer confined to ITV, it was everywhere, a cultural firestorm erupting in real time, and Judi could feel the division. She could hear the mixed reactions, the clapping that bolstered Welch, the groans that tried to defend her. It wasn't unanimous reverence anymore. The very fact that a portion of the audience sided with Denise was devastating. For Judi, who had spent decades commanding universal respect, the realization that she was no longer beyond criticism was a humiliation greater than Welch's words themselves. The tension in the room was unbearable. Every look, every murmur, every clap carried weight. The atmosphere was toxic, and it was Judi who was suffocating. The producers, watching from behind the cameras, could see it spiraling out of control. Loose Women thrives on fiery debates, but this wasn't spirited banter anymore. This was a live implosion, and it risked derailing the entire broadcast. During an ad break, chaos unfolded behind the scenes. Crew members rushed to the table, whispering frantically, trying to calm the situation. Reports suggest Judi refused to stay seated unless Denise issued an apology. Her voice, clipped and icy, carried across the set. "This is unacceptable. I will not sit here and be disrespected." Denise, true to form, didn't budge. She shrugged off the suggestion of apologizing, her defiance radiating for everyone to see. "I said what I said," she snapped, refusing to back down even under producer pressure. The standoff was intense. On one side, Judi Dench, furious, humiliated, unwilling to return to the table without a concession. On the other, Denise Welch, unwavering, her refusal to apologize only deepening the drama. And in the middle, producers caught in a nightmare, scrambling to salvage a live broadcast unraveling before their eyes. When the break ended, the decision was clear. Judi Dench did not return to the panel. The cameras rolled on, but the empty seat at the table spoke volumes. The show continued without Dame Judi, as the presenter flatly announced, leaving the audience stunned. The murmurs grew louder, the tension heavier. Viewers at home realized they had just witnessed more than a heated debate. They had watched the downfall of an illusion, and social media, again, exploded. Clips of Judi storming off circulated within minutes. Memes flooded timelines. Headlines began to draft themselves. What should have been another talk show appearance had turned into a spectacle that no one could ignore. For Judi, this was catastrophic. The producers had chosen continuity over her pride. They let the show go on with Denise in control and Judi absent, a decision that spoke volumes about who really held the power in that moment. And for viewers, the damage was irreversible. They had seen the cracks in Judi's polished image, the fury in her eyes, the unwillingness to tolerate dissent. They had seen her lose control, and worse, they had seen her walk away. When the cameras returned from the break, the atmosphere in the studio was unrecognizable. Viewers at home expected Judi Dench to reappear, her usual smile restored, perhaps with a carefully rehearsed quip to gloss over the tension. But the seat where she had sat, the seat that, for decades, audiences would have assumed was a throne for a national treasure, was empty. The announcement was curt, almost clinical. "We'll be continuing without Dame Judi." No explanation, no soft cushioning, just the blunt fact that she was gone. Gasps rippled through the studio audience. Some applauded Denise Welch for holding her ground. Others sat stunned, whispering to one another. Backstage, reports suggest the atmosphere was volcanic. Judi, livid at what she perceived as an unforgivable slight, had refused to return unless Denise apologized on air. But Denise, with her arms folded and her chin raised, refused outright. Producers were left with a nightmare choice: placate Judi, the international star whose name carried prestige, or keep Denise, the fiery panelist who embodied the spirit of Loose Women. They chose Denise, and that was the humiliation. For Judi, it wasn't just that she left the stage, it was that she was replaced, not mourned. The show rolled on without her, as though her absence was a minor inconvenience rather than the collapse of a legacy. The cameras stayed fixed on Denise Welch, who now commanded the table, every word she spoke framed by the gaping void Judi left behind. Viewers at home couldn't believe it. Screenshots of the empty chair spread across Twitter and Instagram within minutes, captions ranging from "Where's Judi?" to "She really walked out." Memes followed instantly, images of royal thrones left empty, photoshopped with Judi's face. TikTok edits spliced her storming off with dramatic music, turning humiliation into entertainment. It was a collapse that unfolded in real time. One moment, Judi Dench was a guest of honor. The next, she was a ghost, her absence louder than any presence she could have maintained. The fallout was swift and merciless. By the time the show had finished airing, news sites were scrambling to write headlines. Some tabloids called it "The Day Dame Judi Lost Her Cool." Others went further, branding it the most embarrassing on-air walkout in loose women history. For Judi, the damage was catastrophic. Her carefully guarded public image had always been one of poise, dignity, and grace. She was the actress who carried herself like royalty, a figure who seemed untouchable in her composure. But the footage told another story. Here was Judi Dench scowling, defensive, unable to handle the challenge of a panelist, unafraid to speak her mind. Critics pounced. Columns emerged not about her acting legacy, but about her arrogance. She wanted respect, one columnist wrote, but she demanded it rather than earned it, and when it wasn't given, she walked away. For an actress whose career had thrived on respect from audiences, directors and peers, this was the most humiliating criticism of all. Worse still, the younger generation of viewers, the ones who fuel social media trends, didn't rally to defend her. Instead, many mocked her, dismissing her as out of touch and fragile. For them, Denise Welch's fiery defiance was refreshing. Judi, in their eyes, was no longer a revered legend. She was a relic who couldn't keep up with the sharp tongues of modern television. The contrast was brutal. For decades, Judi Dench had been portrayed as Britain's Grand Dame, a national treasure beyond reproach, but in a single afternoon that veneer shattered. Her walkout wasn't seen as the dignified refusal of a woman too proud for confrontation. It was seen as weakness, a crack in the armor of a woman who had built her life on control, and reputations, once shattered, are rarely restored. If Judi Dench was humiliated, Denise Welch emerged as the unlikely victor. The same woman who had often been branded too loud, too divisive, too unpredictable was now being hailed as fearless. On social media, clips of Denise standing her ground circulated with captions like, "She said what we were all thinking," and "Finally." Someone calls out Judi Dench. For her fans, this wasn't just a victory. It was vindication. Denise Welch had faced down a national icon and refused to flinch. Even critics who had once dismissed her acknowledged her strength in the moment. "She didn't cower," one commentator wrote. "She didn't let Judi's status silence her. She proved that no one, not even Dame Judi, is beyond challenge." The optics were powerful. Denise remained seated, calm and firm, while Judi stormed away. In the theater of daytime television, the person who remains is always stronger than the person who leaves. Denise had won not just the argument, but the narrative, and she knew it. In the episodes that followed, Denise's confidence was unshaken. She addressed the incident indirectly with quips about people who can't handle being interrupted, and guests who don't like it when others have opinions. The audience laughed, applauded, cheered. She leaned into the role of antagonist, and it paid off. Ratings spiked. Clips went viral. Loose women had not been this relevant in years. For Denise Welch, the clash wasn't a scandal. It was a career-defining moment. The public fallout was immediate and polarizing. Newspapers, morning radio shows, podcasts, everyone was talking about the moment Judi Dench clashed with Denise Welch and lost. For Judi, the incident cast a long shadow. Instead of being remembered for her illustrious acting career, she was suddenly the subject of ridicule, the woman who couldn't handle a daytime talk show. For Denise, however, the narrative was flipped. She was celebrated as bold, as authentic, as unafraid to challenge the untouchable. In living rooms across Britain, viewers debated furiously. Was Denise too harsh? Was Judi too fragile? Was this the fall of a legend, or simply the exposure of a side the public had never seen? Online, the lines were clearer. Younger audiences skewed toward Denise, praising her for refusing to worship at the altar of celebrity. Older audiences defended Judi, appalled at what they saw as a lack of respect for a national treasure. The divide wasn't just generational, it was cultural, and Loose Women had become the battleground. What mattered most, though, was that Judi Dench's once unshakable image had been tarnished. No matter how much her defenders argued, no matter how much her team tried to spin the story, the footage was undeniable. She had bristled, lashed out, lost control, and walked away, and for Denise Welch it was the sweetest irony. A woman often dismissed as too controversial had managed to expose the vulnerability of someone long thought to be invincible.